Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this next in our series of webinars from Insights Now. I trust all of you can see the screen and can hear me fine. If not, please send a note in the chat box. It's great to have all of you here. We're delighted to have all of you attending this webinar that we're entitling Human Insight, Not Just Data Hindsight, bringing consumer tracking data to life. So we hope you'll enjoy what we have to share with you today. There are several objectives that we have in this presentation, this webinar today. One is for all of us together to think about consumer tracking studies in a broader way, maybe than what we have before, and to do that so that they can help us be more effective really at building our brands and building our business. Secondly, to consider some enhanced approaches that we're going to suggest and talk about for gaining more useful insights out of tracking research. And then thirdly, at the end, hopefully we'll be able to help you identify one or two key opportunities for breathing new life into one of your own organization's pieces of tracking work. So those are our objectives for today. There are two of us who are going to be co-presenting today. So I'm Mark Duffy, first of all. I've been in the research industry quite a long time, a variety of locations and types of industries. I'm currently Senior Director of Client Partnerships at Insights Now. And Greg, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Mark. I'm Greg Stuckey. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at Insights Now, and I have always say I have the best job at Insights Now, which probably everybody says they have as well, mostly because I get to work with Mark and get to see all the wonderful new insights that he brings into all of the tracking research and retail-based information that we get to work on together. So delighted to be here today.
Great, thanks, Greg. So just a little bit for some of you who may not be familiar or as familiar with Insights Now as an organization. So as you can see on the slide there, we're a behavioral research firm. We work with our client companies to help win in specific moments of consumer experience and human experience in order to help companies win the market. As you can see there, we're a custom research firm, and we work in each of those areas shown on the graphic there, everything from innovation and product development through marketing communications, brand positioning, brand planning, and strategy. So our company was founded in 2003, so 15 years ago. As I said, we're a behavioral market research company. And what I mean by that is this. So we have an overarching approach to everything that we do, and that's looking at the way that people behave. And when I say that, we're talking about human behavior, not just consumer behavior. How they behave and why they make the decisions that they do. We do that by starting at a point of empathy and really working to understand people's minds and hearts. And that approach has led Insights Now, actually, in the last several years to having been recognized as one of the most innovative research firms in the country, actually even in the world. And so we're happy today to share with you what we've learned. As I said, this is number 13 in a series of webinars that we've been presenting. So there are a number of prior topics. So just to give a little more flavor to what I'm talking about, at Insights Now, a key part of what we believe is that we need to work with our clients in becoming more behavioral in how we look at human beings. And by doing that, we're able to gain greater insights about the success of brands and helping them get into market more speedily and to be more successful in the market. So that's what we believe. What we also know are a couple of things based on our own research, but also a lot of behavioral and psychological research. When we think about success in whatever, whether it's a brand, whether it's an endeavor that you're involved with, that comes about when people recognize you, your brand, your company, your products as being relevant. And we also know that people recognize you as being relevant when your brand, your product, your experience is able to deliver on cues that trigger people's behaviors in specific moments. So we like to say that we help brands identify and win the moments that matter. So just to give you an example here real quickly, when I'm talking about a moment, so think, for example, if with the product of yogurt, if I'm eating yogurt as part of my breakfast on the go as I'm rushing to the train or on the train to head into work, versus a separate situation where I'm offering yogurt to my kids as an after-school snack, those are two very different moments. It's the same product. It might be me as the same person, but the moment is different. Context, the motivations and the needs and the behaviors are different in those moments. And we can think about a moment related to a product usage. It could also be related to moments along a purchase journey, or maybe related to when you receive an advertising or some kind of communication. So that's just to give a flavor of what we're talking about. First of all, just a bit of housekeeping here. You'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen is a chat box, or you can pull up a chat box. So if you have any questions as we go along, and especially at the end, we'll have time for Q&A, you can type those in there. Or if you're having any technical issues, please let us know that as well, and one of our colleagues will help out with that. So before I move to the next slide, I just would like to ask everybody who's attending, just in your own mind for a minute, when you think about consumer tracking research, what comes to your mind? And I had a colleague very early in my career, one time we were working on some tracking research, and the way he described it was that it was sort of like watching paint dry. I think it's a pretty stark image, and one that I've kind of kept that in my mind through all these years. So the idea is often tracking projects, they're not very enlivening. And whereas what we would like to be thinking about is something like this, where it's something more exciting, it's more alive and more vibrant. The point being that it's research that helps provide more nourishment and understanding as we're trying to look at people's minds and hearts. And that's really been my approach over the years, and it's also at Insights now how we look at things. Just to give a little different twist on this, there's a story about a young boy sleeping one night, and a bad storm came through, and it woke him up, and he was crying, and his dad came into the room to comfort him, and his dad was saying, well, you don't need to be afraid. God is always right here with you. And his son said, oh, I know, Daddy, but sometimes I just need somebody with skin on. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to talk about here today. How do we put more skin? How do we put human flesh and understanding more on the bones of what is the data we typically get out of tracking research? So just before we go on, to think about, well, why does it really matter if we bring trackers more to life, breathe more light into them? So if we only had one answer to that question, it would be this. I mean, the whole purpose of doing it is to help build brands and build our business. And so bringing trackers to life is to help us to better do that. It's also a way to help us create more action-focused learning. If we really understand people's behaviors and get more into their minds and hearts related to the trackers, it helps give us more of an action focus. Here are the things that we can do. And it's also more future oriented. It helps us, what we have found, is to be looking more out through the windshield rather than through the rear view mirror. But part of achieving those goals is helping tracking research to be more prescriptive rather than retrospective. So what we're going to talk about here today is ways that we can better grasp some of the motivations behind the metrics, how we can delve into people's emotions, or maybe even their imagination. So in other words, going beyond rational factors and helping companies develop new hypotheses and ideas that might not have been able to be developed without this life-giving aspect. So a key starting point for us, and as we mentioned early on, we're a behavioral research firm. And so our starting foundational point is that any kind of research, including tracking research, really needs to start with this foundation of human behavior as a key to learning and understanding. And it's in monitoring specific behaviors that that monitoring is what's important for us to help build success of our business. And as I mentioned earlier, doing that in the context of specific moments that matter with both consumers as well as companies that are involved. And understanding those behaviors then, out of the tracking information, we're trying to identify what are the influencers, what are those things in our marketplace or in our own business strategy and execution that are influencing those behaviors, those actions. And by doing that, it helps us get a better view of possible future outcomes. Again, what we believe and what we have found. So when we look at track data, then we're looking for patterns to help us better understand those influences and how they're associated with those behaviors that we as a business care about, but also that our customers or prospective customers care about. And if we're not doing all of that in a tracking program, then what we believe is that there's really minimized value otherwise. The other key thing that we would look at here is the importance of relevance, that being really a critical lens. So if behavior is the foundation of this building of consumer understanding, then relevance, we might say, is the structural framework. It's what matters to brands, because it is in relevance that we find the structure for brands being able to create an emotional and behavioral bond. So this first point on this slide here is that relevance is fundamental to creating or disrupting people's habits and what we call on and off ramps, and how do we manage those? So what we're talking about here, just at a real simple level, is when you're relevant, you create on-ramps, people getting on the highway for your brand. When you're irrelevant, you're creating off-ramps. And the center of all of this is a consumer's journey, which in our view is just a collection of moments. So these are moments of opportunity. These ramps are associated with different points or opportunities of disruption that create habits. So an off-ramp, for example, a consumer recognizes that your product, a product that they love, has changed or has become inferior to competition. So they become alienated. Whereas an on-ramp is occurring when your brand is in that consumer's mind, joining their consideration set for a particular use or moment. So this idea, this construct of on and off ramps is useful whether you as a company are trying to be the disruptor, in other words, disrupt your competitors' activities, Or conversely, if you want to avoid being the disruptee, so to speak. One of the important considerations here is having strategies. If you're geared towards creating new on-ramps to bring in new brand fans, it's important to do that, of course, without alienating your current fans, without being your own worst enemy and creating your own off-ramps. Or if you need to strengthen elements that retain your brand fans. Just one other quick point about this idea. If you as a company have identified certain ways that are effective for creating on-ramps or avoiding off-ramps, then the consumer, the human behaviors related to those things would be important things to track. So just a quick example, in a retailer context that I worked in, fitting rooms was always a key issue for people, a source of dissatisfaction. And when we did some deep dive qualitative research to understand what people really meant by that, one of the key things that came out was, gee, if you just had mirrors out on the sales floor for many of the things we're looking to buy, coats, even sweaters or sweatshirts or shirts, we wouldn't even need to go in and use the fitting room. And so that was a change that was made by that retailer to help prevent those kinds of off-ramps. And then we were able to add that to the behavior that we were tracking and how people were reacting to that. Continuing on, just a couple of other points about relevance. It's also, and really I just alluded to it, it's what drives either positive or negative brand behaviors. And if they're negative, they're more disruptive. So one of the key things that we have found when we talk about relevance, it's relevance to the people that we care about, but it's also the relevance of the brand that you're tracking, for example. It's also relevant in the environment. So, for example, if we just think about advertising as an example and think about tracking of advertising, if we look at this grid, the two axes, on the y-axis, we're saying from lower to higher relevance to the person, and on the x, lower to higher relevance to the page, the content, the video where the ad might have appeared. And that top right-hand box where both of those are high, those are places where we see greater impact, positive impact on brand and the metrics that we track. The converse is also true, where the advertising could actually be annoying if the ad itself is not very relevant, and it's also placed in an environment that's not relevant. So actually, Greg, I'm going to ask you to jump in. You actually had a recent example of this.
You bet. So for me, I love the outdoors. And currently, I'm in the market for a new backpacking tent. And because my old one's just getting old and I want a nice light weight one, but really not spending a lot of time looking at it because life's busy and you know how that goes. So a couple weeks ago, I was online watching some YouTube videos, and these were outdoor based videos. So basically people going to different places, and I wanted to see how those hikes looked. And sometimes, halfway through a YouTube video, it gives you that stop and it says, oh, in order to continue this, you're going to watch this 15 seconds of video. And most of the time when those comes up, I find myself fairly annoyed by them. And sometimes I even stop watching the video because of those. However, in this particular case, the video, the advertisement that popped up was a tent video. So it was hyper relevant to what I was doing. It was super relevant to the content in which it was in. And so I watched it, I was engaged with it. And I thought, oh, I should check out that brand. So it fit really well. Now, if that same ad had come up to me, say at work, where I'm really not focusing on anything outdoors, maybe I'm on my LinkedIn page and it pops up, then it would be really out of place. And it would be more like the top left. It might have been super relevant to me, but I might not have paid that much attention to it. It wouldn't have been annoying. I wouldn't have got a negative impression of the brand, but it would just been out of place and it wouldn't have mattered to me because I'm not in the right moment for that to be impactful. Whereas had it been completely irrelevant, for instance, maybe I was playing Words with Friends or something that was a game or something, and all of a sudden it came up and it slowed my play down or something like that, or broke my concentration, then it would have been a really bad match. And even though it might have been somewhat relevant to me, it may have been really irrelevant to the moment I was in, and it could have gone some other ways. So as an example, we've got on the next slide an example, like if you took this classic Intel ad and you put it into all the different types of moments where a person could be on their smartphone. And so, the biggest moment is me time, where you're just relaxing. This particular ad, which is advertising the Intel product and product line, it kind of fits with me time moments, but the relaxing moment really doesn't connect with this particular ad and ad message. Whereas when people are in discovery moments and shopping moments and accomplish moments where they're accomplishing tasks to get done, this ad fits extremely well, and it can be very relevant to both the content and the page. Whereas like in moments where if this shows up when people are in preparation moments where they're making lists and doing, they're getting ready for events for the day, or they're in self-expression moments where they're trying to be hyper creative, this is really out of place and actually develops a negative brand impression. So it provides, being able to take a look at relevance when you're doing your tracking and your monitoring, whether it be your ads or any other your market messaging, into the different elements that incorporate relevance to both the person and the content or the situation or moment in which it's placed, helps you understand and prioritize and hone either change your messaging for different moments or hone your placement of the ad so that it fits better and you get better brand impressions and you get greater brand lift.
Great, thanks, Greg, for going through those two examples. So for everyone on board, just one last thing before we jump into some examples here to wrap up this lead-in and overview. So the other point about relevance is that it's really in a state of relevance that we're best able to create brand positioning, brand messaging, building brand strength, and those are often areas that are involved in tracking types of research programs. So we just wanted to cover those two key points, the importance of behavior and the critical issue of relevance. Now, when we talk about tracking research, so I'm just going to we're going to go into a couple of examples here. There are really two broad buckets that we're going to talk about. The one that most of us probably most clearly think about is that ongoing survey tracking. So it's a program going on over a long period of time. You might be reporting out on it on a quarterly basis, for example. So it might be different types of behavioral tracking, or tracking your brand health or marketing communications. But we also look at, and we have an example we're going to go through here, where it's still tracking, but it's on more of a short-term basis. So it's not just a single point in time, but it's not an ongoing long-term kind of program. So it could be looking at digital click streams or purchase or shopping or visiting. So the first example that we're going to look at, and actually Greg is going to jump in and explain this one.
All right, our first example, we're actually going to be talking about a program here where we're tracking behavior over time, so survey data over a course of time, and you're monitoring how reactions to certain products attributes, say in this particular case, we're going to be focusing on our clean label enthusiasts, how those move and change over time. And what we're wanting to show you is that you can bring that traditional data, tracking data, to life by connecting in multiple types of other information. And so I'm going to show you how you can bring that to life with additional qualitative insights, as well as with monitoring online activities from these folks. So this example's focused on our clean label enthusiast panel. So This is a specific research community that we have. It's a group of people who are very forward-thinking primary shoppers. They are heavily connected and really the people behind the free from food movement, which is one of the faster growing food movements within the United States. And they have very distinct views about ingredients, claims, brands. And what we're doing with this panel is we're monitoring their opinions about different claims, their opinions about different types of ingredients in different moments. And that's creating this wonderful database for people to mine, but it's also allowing us to track their behaviors over time to see what things are is that community of people who are driving this trend in the industry. What are the types of things that are becoming more valuable to them? What kinds of things are becoming less valuable to them? So the first thing we have to talk about is organic and sustainable farming practices. So if you look at the graph on the left-hand side there, one of the things that we see with the clean label enthusiasts, and that's labeled CLE in this particular case, is that the percentage of people who feel that they're influenced to buy a product or more influenced to buy a product when an organic claim is being made on the label. At the beginning of this year, in January of 2018, almost half the people said that they were influenced by that type of a claim. And as we've gone through the year, the percentage of people who are saying they're influenced has been decreasing and decreasing and decreasing to the point where now in September, it's all the way down to 28%. And you can see that that's a much bigger drop than with the people who are not part of that free from movement. So one of the questions is, that's interesting, but how do I bring that to life? How do I know what is going on? Conversely, we see sustainable farming practice concerns increasing over that same period of time. So what the tracking doesn't really tell us is why this is happening. It's an interesting data point. It's an interesting piece of behavioral knowledge, but it doesn't tell you why. So if you dig into it from a qualitative standpoint and go and talk to the people who are positive and negative about these particular claims, you find out there's a couple of key pieces. The first one with organic, what we found out was that having organic or natural on the label doesn't signal to these people that it actually is a clean label. So what they're finding is the claim of organic can still be associated with products that they don't feel are very healthy for them. So you could have an organic Twinkie and they are saying, well, that's not quite what I'm looking for in a clean label because it still has other ingredients that I'm not excited about. Likewise, then from a sustainable farming practice standpoint, what we're finding is concerns about like GMO products, which is part of the sustainable farming practice movement, are increasing over the same period of time. And so you're figuring out that the reality of a claim of organic is not that they don't value organic products, it's that they're not tying that to products that have clean labels because they're starting to see that organic products can fall away. And likewise, they're getting more concerned about how the farming is actually happening. And that's actually part of the organic thing that they actually care about is the farming practice, a lot less about the fact that you may have one or two organic ingredients within a course of a product. Okay. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about qualitative research and marrying that to tracking data is that you can also look at qualitative insights from the vantage point of seasonality. So one thing that we often don't think about when we're doing tracking research is that unique events change data. So, and one of those unique events is the seasonal change, and specifically around specific types of opinions. So we know, for instance, with our clean label enthusiast panel, that when they get into the holiday season, they're much more willing to buy products that they consider not clean label because there's this big connection with nostalgia, comfort, joy, things that they had growing up that simply were not clean label, but they still love them. So there's a lot of indulgence going on around, for instance, the holiday season. So you get a better understanding. So instead of just seeing that blip in the data of types of products buying, going, oh my goodness, what's happening? You start to understand with the qualitative insights, why is that occurring, and whether that's going to be something that you can plan will occur again the next time around. You can also use qualitative insights to get future forward looking. So that's what Mark was saying. It's not looking out the rear view mirror as what the data was happening in the past, but actually looking forward. So qualitative insights will also give you that future vision. So at the beginning of this last year, we asked all of our clean label enthusiasts to tell us what their resolutions were for the new year, specifically related to the types of foods they were going to have and the types of clean label things that they were endeavoring for. And we saw things like reducing sugar, reducing salt, increasing water intake. And that gave us the vision to be able to say, oh, if those are the big themes, we should be monitoring those behaviors as we go through the years, because those are their intentions as you go through the year. So it gives you that ability to bring that to life by getting a better vision of the future. Okay. Now, the other thing that's great about the qualitative is that you can start drilling down deeper and deeper. So you can go from here's a resolution, which is more categorical, to understanding, well, is this applied to just the products you're buying, or is it applying to the whole category, or is it applying to just a specific moment of use? And then drilling all the way down into the product and the brand itself to say, well, are there specific products that are going to benefit from this? Are there specific brands that have an Achilles heel that are going to get injured by this particular future desire for the people? So it really helps gauge how people may possibly change over future. So tying in the qualitative gives you that new level of insights. Now, the other piece of data that you can add to bring the qualitative information or go beyond the qualitative information is look at another type of track data, which is clickstream data. And if we take a look, for instance, at our clean label enthusiasts, clickstream data is really nice because it's passive data. It's not self-reported information. So you get to see actual behaviors over a period of time to see if there's anything that you can identify in their online behaviors that are explanatory or helpful in your marketing messaging, or explanatory for the tracking data you're seeing. So for instance, if we look at our clean label versus non-clean label enthusiasts, we see that clean label enthusiasts are spending less time per session. So anytime they get online, they spend about 45 or 44 minutes per session, whereas non-clean label enthusiasts tend to spend 55 minutes per session. So they're spending a little bit less time online. That's interesting in and of itself and gives you some interesting opportunities. But what they spend their time online doing is even more interesting. So they're spending 80% more time on health and wellness sites. That makes total sense. These people are into clean labels. They also spend, though, 42% more time on entertainment sites. So that's watching movies, watching videos, and listening to music. So that's really interesting, especially in this case, spending more time on Netflix and Amazon than non-clean label enthusiasts. And then they spend 29% more of their time doing search, especially with the Google search engine. So if you're looking at targeting this group and you're seeing certain behaviors track over time, you know if they're much more likely to be on Google doing search, then Google AdWords, things like that become more valuable to you, because you know you can help become more relevant because you're targeting a group of people who happen to be in a specific time and place. Now, there's other things. If we thought initially that these people were probably going to spend a lot more time looking at news, like, hey, these people are super informed. They're spending a lot more time reading up on ingredients and things like that. That was one of our hypotheses. The reality is, no, they don't really. It's actually a tiny bit less, although really a negligible amount less. They spend about the same amount of time reading news, but it's what kind of news they're reading that is the big difference. So for instance, they spend a lot more time reading WordPress, which are personal blogs. So they're connecting more on a personal basis with folks rather than, as if you look at the non-CLE, they're focusing a lot more of their time on the traditional news media agencies, CNN, Washington Post, Fox, CBS, et cetera, so forth. So you get to understand better about what they're reading, where you can contact them, and then what's the style of information that goes along with their opinions being changed over time.
Thanks, Greg. I really love those examples. I think it's so helpful to think about those additional pieces that help the overall tracking, and what we're doing with CLE is really exciting. So we want to move on to our second example, and as I mentioned a couple moments ago, we also think about tracking in terms of things that are more short-term. So again, it's not just a one point in time kind of survey. So this is an example where we're looking both at online behavior as well as survey reported purchase and motivations and related information. So what we're looking at here is the alcoholic beverage category. Actually, we've done a couple of different similar studies here that we'll pull examples from. And in general, there's a challenge with online purchasing. For one thing, the brands themselves have certain restrictions on what they're able to do in terms of marketing communications. And also, typically, people haven't really started thinking about purchasing spirits in the online environment. So a couple of different examples where we're doing research to identify what are those digital behaviors that are related with consideration and purchase, or even abandonment with online purchasing, and how can we help increase that consideration and purchase. So what we had here was the short-term tracking, where we had the same participants involved both in a survey and with passive metering again. So the metering, that actually the online clickstream, was the primary focus initially for the client. But what we ended up with was a research design that included the survey research. So starting with that, so we did a kind of a pre and post survey, the initial survey looking at people who are active online and who either recently bought or intend to buy in that category. And we're asking them to report the intentions of types and brands of alcoholic beverages that they intend to buy in the near future. And then we did a second survey 30 days later to really find out what products did they actually consider, and what did they purchase, and what were the behaviors, what were the attitudes and motivations, but also what were some of the different moments that were involved, and we'll see more about that in just a moment. But then we had the clickstream data that we were collecting, and again here this is passive. You know, we have people who agreed to allow to have software running in the background on their computers, and so we're tracking all of their online clicks, the same people over the same period of time, you know, on their phones, their laptops, tablets, desktops, etc. And we had a curated list of specific websites related to the category. So some of them are retail, but there are others that are that provide other kinds of information related to that category. And a key to this was to integrate all of that information together to identify what were the most common kinds of spirits-related digital patterns related to those sites, and how did those relate with increased consideration or purchase. So from a broad stroke point of view, what we got out of this was being able to look at the journey and what are the things influencing. So similar to what I was talking about early on. So we were able to identify for example, what are the starting points? What are the most common starting points for a path that ultimately leads to a purchase? And we looked at purchase, both if they purchased online or offline, but that whole path, where did they start? What were the different levels of interactions with different types of sites, and the kinds of flow that we saw in that digital journey between those sites? And then being able to link that together with their stated activities, what they told us were some of the triggers and motivations related to the types of sites that they were at, what information were they seeking about the brands and products and retailers. So for example, looking at some of the social related aspect, and we looked at this including not only social media, but the old-fashioned way, actual person-to-person social interaction. And we're able to identify for these clients what were some of the key triggers for people, for example, when they bought what they had intended to buy versus those who bought something different from that. And one of the interesting things that we saw out of that actually was how important personal recommendations were in this category to affecting some of those behaviors. We also looked at some of the different kinds of search and content sites that they were using and what they were doing. And there was a pretty wide variety of things that people were looking for, but as you can imagine, there were certain things that were more pronounced than others. So whether it was online or offline or advertising, things that they used for discovery, for shopping, comparing prices, reviews, things like looking at recipes, understanding ingredients, for example, even in this category was something that we saw. And then if we think about the point of purchase, whether that's bricks and mortar or online, the online proportion of that is still relatively small, and we were able to quantify that. But as I'm sure many of you have seen in your own categories, nearly 100% of purchases, regardless of where they were made, were being affected in some way by their online exploration and online activity. And that influenced their different buying moments, which is part of what we were able to quantify, and also where and what to buy. Part of what we saw here too, and you might realize this, is that we're looking at different stages along the process and different related behaviors. And so again, here there were points where, so looking at the behaviors, looking at the process, we were also able to understand the relevance of brands or the relevance of different types of messaging. A couple of interesting things that came out of this was input to help our clients, for example, with their sales and marketing communications. So for example, really understanding better what kind of brand and visual imagery did they need to build on and improve on with their online presence or with the retailers that they collaborate with. Also, back to this point about recommendations, how putting together a plan for how they might increase personal recommendations. The next two slides, these are examples from a different study, but in the same category and with the same overall approach. So what we're looking at in this first chart here, what we're trying to understand is what are some of the effects of online activity, first of all, on consideration. So if we look at the graphic here, the blue bar, well, the green bar is what brands people were considering before, and the blue bar, what they considered after. So that's before and after the online activity that we were measuring and looking at what changes. So for example, here what we see is that brand 1 and brand 7, those are two brands that, because of the online activity that we had, and we had all of that information to tie into it, but based on their activity, those brands especially benefited in terms of becoming more widely considered as part of the purchase set or consideration set before and after. We also wanted to look at what were the kinds of things impacting purchases. Now in this graph, the green and blue bars represent something a little bit different. Green are what we call switchers. So those are people who did actually buy a product or a brand that was different than what they initially considered in that pre and post survey measurement. And renewers were people who actually bought what they intended to buy. So for those renewers, what we're seeing here is certain types of sites, in particular branded alcohol sites, really just supported what they already felt. So probably they were often going to sites of brands that they were familiar with, and it helped to reinforce that, which is certainly important when we think about habits. When we look at switchers, however, as an example, recipe sites. So for those people, when they the visitation to recipe sites was more common among those people who bought something different than what they initially expected. So what you can notice here in these two examples is to just think about the potential for changing habits or understanding how we might be able to disrupt or prevent disruption of people's habits. So with those two examples, we just have a couple of other quick things to cover, but just to quickly recap what we've covered here, we've talked about a couple of different lenses and approaches that we recommend and that we've used very successfully with clients. So first of all, that focus on human behavior, associating that with specific moments that matter to people and to your company, identifying those on and off ramps and what's driving that. And as we've talked in our examples, really incorporating or integrating together not only that typical quantitative tracking information, but including qualitative and digital metering. So again, the aim here is to better understand behaviors and habits of human beings, not just consumers, in the moments that matter, and then to identify disruptions that we can use to our advantage. Now, we just want to wrap up with a couple of other ideas, things that we have done or looked at, again, in terms of bringing life to your tracker. And I'm just going to go through these quickly. We don't have full-blown examples. But the first one is to illuminate what's going on with people in terms of their emotions. And at Insights Now, and I know other organizations as well, we have a particular approach to measuring emotional reactions. And it's a scientifically based approach using images and storytelling and having people describe those images and their emotions. So for example, in a tracking context, we could have two brands, for example, that might be completely equal in a particular metric. You know, is that a brand that was being sought out? Maybe an advertising recall measure or a shopper experience measure. But the emotions could be very different between those two brands. One could be evoking emotions of being calm and relaxed, and the other one could be energetic and excited. So it's not a question of is one better than the other. It's, you know, is one of those emotional states more relevant to your brand or what you're trying to do in your own positioning. Secondly, using videos. There are several benefits and ways that we've used videos, again, to add on to, or that we have the ability to add on to the understanding from trackers. So again, when we're talking about moments, we could use video, have people take video to help us understand specific moments related to their tracker metrics. So we might have gotten their tracker information, we could ask particular people based on their answers or demographics or a segment that they're in, and ask them to give us a video that better explains what was that moment about and why did you give a high or low rating for our brand, just as an example. You can also use that to clarify what are some of the cues that they receive from the product that they use, from an ad, from say a retail experience. What were the cues that signaled particular benefits or consequences? And again, measures that we might have in a tracker. The other practical benefit is that we can add videos and video clips actually into the reports that are produced to help better communicate the insights to your leadership team. And finally, just the idea of incorporating mobile in general. So again, this could be somebody after taking a tracking survey and we've got all of that rich data, maybe we ask them a follow-up set of questions about your brand or a competitor. Maybe it's more detailed questions about their perceptions, their attitudes, how they're feeling. Maybe it's more specific detail about the use of a product or shopping in a store or visiting a website, getting more of that instant impression that adds more depth and clarity. It could also be things like shopping journals. We're asking them to look at their journey through retail, or maybe looking at a menu or something like that, or even looking at products on shelf or on a website. So those are the things that cover the ideas that we wanted to share with you. So just to leave you with this thought and thinking about your own organization, where might there be some low-hanging fruit for improvement, meaning a particular tracking program that maybe is keeping you awake at nights, or just one that you see might be easy or most important as a way of adding on some of these kinds of ideas that we've presented, whether it's behavioral tracking, maybe digital clickstream that you're already doing. How can we get more life out of that? Or very typical brand health or MarCom effectiveness tracking. So just want to leave you with that thought and have you think about those things that you might think want to look at as follow-up steps. So with that, again, we would like to invite anyone who has any questions. I'm just checking here to see. Let me just look here. So if anybody has not answered a question, if you have one you'd like to input, Greg, have you seen anything pop up here?
Well, we've got one in right now, and the first is any advice or tips for working with the digital or the clickstream data. So great question. So absolutely. Number one, you saw their logo on, but we have a partner in NetQuest we work with a lot of clickstream. They've got some great ebooks that have some information there. So definitely seek that out. There's a lot of good information published about there that helps you get to know what are all the types of data that are even available. So that's a good starting point if you're just getting started on everything. For us, especially when it comes to tracker data, we're finding that the time spent, so looking at the data from the vantage point of, you can collect a lot of different types of data, but if I look at percentage of people who do this, percentage of people who do that, actually the amount of time spent on doing certain tasks is actually some of the most valuable data, because that relates to actual behavior and how much time you're committing to them. It gives you a sense of how valuable that particular activity is, because if you spend more time doing it, it's obviously got more value. So focus on time spent. That's one. You saw that we did that here. Also, you really need to group and simplify. So clickstream data, any sort of digital stream data, is really messy and gets really big really fast. So you've got to, before you go into it, think about what type of information you really want to look at. Have some hypotheses about what types of things are going to connect with whatever your digital trackers are connected to. So, for instance, in our case, we're looking at like the organic claim. Well, we felt that probably one of the things that was heavily influencing that was news. So we took time to really study the news section as best we could. Another thing is that I would say the final piece is probably comparing and contrasting groups. One of the things that's great about being able to look at clickstream type of information or digital information that makes it easy to understand is when you can compare things. So if you have people who are recalling a brand versus those who don't recall a brand, what are those component pieces? So compare and contrast a group. We had the CLE versus the non-CLE, compare and contrast those groups. So being able to do add that simple A versus B, compare contrast into your thinking process for digital will really help you simplify that information and make it easier to digest, because it is pretty messy.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for sharing that, and also for mentioning NetQuest there. We neglected to do that on those slides, I think, and it's important to note that that is an organization that we partner with, and they helped provide us a lot of the key data that we pulled out and summarized there. Just one question that I had from somebody was a question about moments, and how do you get people to think about moments? So just real quickly before our time is up here, a particular approach that we use here at Insights Now is what we call priming. So if we go back to the example that I used earlier about yogurt, I'm the same person, it's the same product, but it's two different moments. This priming, the idea there is we get people to go back in their minds and re-envision those moments, and we would pick out a specific moment. We actually have them go through and describe, tell a story about what was involved there. So if it's me eating yogurt on the run on the train, I might talk about it being a rainy day. It was really hectic. The yogurt was great, but I hardly thought about it. I just shoved it in my face. Versus a moment where you bought that, with your kids for after school. So priming them to get them to think about that moment really deeply, and then going into the qualitative types of exploration that we would do. So that was a good question too.
Nice. Very nice. All right. I don't see any other new ones popping up at the moment.
Here. So just one final slide here, just as a point of information for everybody. So we continue to do these webinars on a monthly basis. Our next one will be on November 15th, again at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. And we're going to be going back and revisiting our clean label enthusiast community. And in this particular webinar, we're going to be talking about it's not just for humans anymore. And as you can tell by the image there, we're going to be talking about pet products and how people really love their pets, and this whole free from movement in food relates to pet food as well. So we hope all of you can join us for that. Again, we're delighted for all of you who joined us. You will receive a follow-up email. There will be a link to the recording and to the presentation deck if you want to look at it more thoroughly, or if you have other colleagues that weren't able to join in today. Again, thank you all very much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye.
Bye.